So I'm a fourth generation carpenter. Basically worked with my hands most of my adult life. So on my father's side, my father, my grandfather, my great grandfather were all carpenters. I'm the first one to actually build furniture. My father, who actually didn't practice carpentry as a profession, but was always really good as a carpenter. When I was a kid, since I was never able to meet my grandfather and my great grandfather, it was always nice to be able to go back to where my dad grew up and have a connection with the places that they built when they were carpenters. And so I think that's kind of where I kind of got the urge to work with my hands. When I was a kid, my mom and dad constantly allowed us to tinker and take things apart, and we were pretty free-range kids back in the day, so not a whole lot of adult supervision there. Kind of left our own devices. And but yeah, just over a period of time, when I was in high school, I took shop class, and really the things that I excelled at were those classes that I had hands-on with. So, I took woodworking and welding and auto mechanics and drafting and all that stuff. So, everything I've done in life was basically working with my hands. So I think building what I'm doing now, building custom furniture, is the culmination of all those jobs coming together and all that skill that I've learned over the years. And we'll see if I can continue doing it or not. It's not exactly the easiest job in the world, but yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun. My mother's side of the family is actually can trace the roots back to the Great Smoky Mountains before the park was a national park. My great grandmother actually was born in the park, so it's one of those connections that I really enjoy in life. That I can kind of go back and see those places that my family lived in the past. I've actually there's a few farmsteads that are in the park that are past aunts and uncles. That the farmsteads are still there. That it's now the national park's responsibility to take care of those farms. So that's kind of cool to go back and see the places where some of my ancestors lived. And not only on my father's side were there carpenters, there was actually carpenters on my mother's side as well. One of my, I believe it's seventh or eighth uncle, actually had a farm in the park, and he was a farmer. Well, if you're a farmer, you're probably a carpenter too, so you got to be a jack of all trades. But that farm is still there. The National Park Service has preserved it, and you can still go back and visit it and see, how he, built the entire barn by hand. No nails or anything like that. All Morrison tenon, and it's a pin frame barn basically, so it's held together with wood pins. But yeah, that's another kind of cool aspect where I still have that connection to my past, that I can go visit the things that my ancestors built back in the day. I would say my first exposure to woodworking probably might have been with my father. When we lived in Tennessee, he did a huge addition onto our house. And of course, me and my brother were there. We were basically slave labor. And, we worked for our room and board. So my dad would put us to work doing whatever we could do. I think as far as woodworking, like I said, I've got that connection to my grandfather and my great grandfather to go back and see those places that they've built by hand. And so I feel like that, I've kind of been exposed to, in one way or another, kind of woodworking all my life. Not only woodworking, but working with my hands. I'd have to say that my favorite piece was this big walnut mid-century modern console. Had a lot of angles on it. The joinery on it was extremely difficult. It took me about 4 months to build it. It's one of those things where you just can't rush through it. And it ended up being really just a beautiful piece. Yeah, definitely that was probably my favorite project just because of the difficulty level. It's one of those things where I really had to take my time and not rush through it, and it really came out pretty nice in the end. My shop is in an old dairy barn. We live on a farm that's been in my wife's family for over 100 years. When me and my wife first got married, we moved into the house, and the barn at the time was being used to house cattle in it. My wife's uncle was raising cattle here. And when he retired, the barn kind of sat for a while not being used. And just over a period of time, I kind of took the barn back over again, repaired. There was a lot of issues with it. The roof was in bad shape. There were structural issues. And so in a day when we are tearing down so many barns because to some folks, they've outlived their usefulness. And to me, this is just a piece of history that needs to be saved. And the last thing that I was going to do was tear it down. I think it goes back to that big mid-century modern console that I built. Like I said, it was a really difficult piece to build. And while not everybody loves mid-century modern furniture, I definitely do enjoy building it. I believe it's my favorite type of furniture to build, just because there's a lot of challenge in it. Lots of angles, and it's just really just a treat to build it. Not that, I build anything that the customer wants me to build. I can't shy away from just because I don't like this or don't like that style of furniture. I wouldn't be in business if I treated it that way. But I'd have to say mid-century modern is probably my favorite type of furniture to build. I don't really consider myself a woodworker or a carpenter. While those are I guess the technical term that you could use to describe what I do, I consider myself more of a craftsman. The pieces of furniture that I build will be hopefully passed on through generation to generation, just like some of the furniture that I have that my parents owned I now own, and hopefully someday I'll be able to pass those on down through my family as well. Yeah, so I'm on the board of directors of a local land trust here in Indiana called Niches Land Trust. And basically their goal is to protect the ecosystems here in Indiana through proper stewardship of the land. Basically what they do is they get land either donated to them or they buy it at a reduced rate. And basically what they do is they try to take that land and either turn it back into what it used to be, whether it was hardwood forest or prairie, or those properties that are already forested or have prairies, try to maintain those to help reduce the encroachment of invasive species and just protect the natural world. I think that's really important in this day and age that we just don't care enough for the planet like we should. Whether you call me an environmentalist or whatever, I just feel like that's important, not only because that's what I depend on my livelihood for, preserving those hardwood forests and harvesting them properly, where they're here for me to be able to use it, and then for future generations as well. So yeah, I'm a strong believer in what Niches does, and I really, truly enjoy being involved with them. I really do want to try to keep pushing my craft. That's part of the enjoyment that I get out of it, and trying to just get better and better every day. Like I said, you always make mistakes. Anybody that does this work that tells you that they don't make mistakes is not telling the truth. So I think in 2020, I've really starting to try to push my skill a little bit more and making sure that, I'm keeping my chops sharp. All right.